Hey there, I'm the _Twig, and I like analysing game rules. One of the most iconic spells in D&D is Find Familiar. I'm pretty sure that every single wizard made in the last god knows how long has had a familiar. It's an incredibly versatile spell with both combat and non-combat benefits, and I want to explore everything that it can do. Or at least everything with rules support that I can fit into a video without going too long. Find Familiar is so versatile, has so many options, and relies so much on roleplay and imagination that I cannot cover every single use case. Just the best ones that you can plan around. As a really easy example, if you join my Patreon, your familiar can get absolutely ripped. Ever wanted a cat that can bench press a car? This is how you do it. If you join the higher tiers like SK, Mark Rainbow, Barney, Jaleli, and Precipice, then your familiar also becomes a FIDE certified international master. So, table of contents. I'm first going to give a quick reminder of how the spell actually works, go through all of the interesting forms, talk about the Pact of the Chain forms and a couple of other Eldritch invocations, and throughout I'll be peppering in some interesting tactical options. But for now, back to the top. Find Familiar is a first level wizard spell. That means that it's accessible to absolutely everyone right from first level, simply by taking the Magic Initiate Wizard Origin feat. There's also a few other ways to get it, like Ritual Caster or Druid's Wild Companion. For most characters it's got a casting time of 1 hour, plus the ritual time of 10 minutes, and you cannot do that during a short rest. Casting a spell is actually one of the specified end conditions of a short rest. If you don't need to short rest though, but say your Warlock wants to refresh their spell slots, then you are absolutely allowed to cast Find Familiar whilst everyone else short rests. Druids and Pact of the Chain Warlocks, however, can get it with just one action, which definitely has some important uses which we'll get into. In addition, there's a consumed material component that you'll have to keep track of. But again, the Druid gets to skip this. They can just do it without the 10 GP incense. The duration of the spell is instantaneous, which actually means that it's permanent because the rules interact weirdly like that. And when you do cast it, you get a pet beast which can be any of the listed options or any other CR0 beast. And there are some unlisted ones that we will be looking at. The beast can do pretty much anything it would normally be able to do, except take the attack action, which you probably wouldn't want to do anyway. These things are pretty weak in combat. In addition to that, while your familiar is active, you can share senses with it by spending your bonus action each turn, speak telepathically with it, put it into or take it out of a pocket dimension, and cast touch range spells from its location by using its reaction, which it probably wasn't using anyways. As far as we're concerned, touch range spells are pretty much free. That brings us to our first two tactical options, pocket warping and touch spells. Right, here's the situation. There is a noble's house that you need to snoop around for incriminating evidence. You can't just walk in, but you can get within 30 feet of a window. All you do is you put your familiar in its pocket dimension, and then you bring it back out in a space that you can see on the other side of the window. Hey presto, you just teleported a spy into the noble's house. There's loads of uses for this. Basically, anytime you need to get to the other side of a barrier that you can see through, whether it's a jail cell, a grate, a wall of force, pocket warp to the rescue. The other option that I mentioned there is touch spells, which is exactly what it sounds like, casting touch spells through the familiar. Importantly, the familiar does not get to move first, so it must already be in position where you must use the ready action, which requires concentration. Or alternatively, you can use the fairly common homebrew of having the familiar share your turn instead of having its own turn. In all honesty, the touch spells aren't the most impressive thing in the world. It's incredibly limited to situations where you can't just run in yourself, which, given the positioning requirement, will be few and far between. Your best options are probably Cure Wounds, Jump, Fly, maybe an Invisibility or Restoration spell, possibly something like Arcane Lock or Meld into Stone on a reconnaissance mission, or Stone Shape, which can allow you to put up an immediate barrier around an ally in danger or a threatening enemy. Touch range spells is realistically pretty niche, and you'll have to look for use cases on your own. I don't think it's a standout part of Find Familiar, although it does lead on nicely to our third tactic, Dragon's Breath. Dragon's Breath is a second level touch range spell, which gives one ally the ability to do 3d6 damage in a 15-foot cone every single turn, and importantly, it uses the magic action. Since that isn't the attack action, you can use touch range spells to have the familiar casted on itself, and it can use it, which means that you now have a little pet flying around breathing fire on everything, without using your own action. That's a really good boost to your party's damage. Anyway, with all of those tactics out of the way, let's get onto our forms. Except, wait, first I need to talk about equipment. So one of the eternal debates of Find Familiar is, can it administer a potion? If it can, then you can give your familiar a bunch of potions of healing or something like that, and they can serve as a party medic, getting anyone who falls to 0 back up. There's other stuff that you can do as well, but that's the basic idea. And the answer to this question is, there's nothing technically stopping familiars from using potions or any other items. I see 2 common rulings for this. Either all familiars can use items, or familiars can use items only if they have hands. As such, I will be specifying in the stat blocks for all familiars whether or not they have hands, but this is a guideline only. Ask your DM what their ruling on items is. Okay, end of the fake outs, let's actually get into forms, starting with old reliable, the owl. This is easily the most popular form, and it's not even up for debate. There's precisely 2 reasons for it: 60-foot fly speed and flyby, which allows it to ignore opportunity attacks. It is hands down the best form at the primary combat tactic of a familiar, help spam. The owl flies 30 foot above the battlefield, swoops down at an enemy, uses the help action, flies back up without opportunity attacks, and the next ally that attacks that enemy gets advantage. Free advantage generation every single round. Now, this isn't quite as good as it's made out to be due to the reliance on turn order and the fact that advantage is already pretty common, but in combat this is your basic use for a familiar, and the owl does it best. Outside of that though, the owl also has a +5 perception, which is an eternally useful non-combat skill. At low levels it might even be the highest in the party, as well as +5 for stealth when it needs to infiltrate, and 120 foot dark vision, which you can piggyback off of by just spending your bonus action every turn to zero senses. The owl does pretty much everything. Now though, we get a more specialised form, the bat. This thing also has a fly speed, only 30 foot though, but more importantly it has 60 foot blindsight. This brings us to our next tactic, blindsight sharing. Let's say that you're fighting an invisible enemy, or you've just put down heavy obscurement from something like a fog cloud. If you have a bat, at the cost of just 1 bonus action, you get blindsight, negating the invisible foe's advantage or giving yourself advantage in the fog cloud. Actually, on the subject of fog cloud, if you're inside a fog cloud and your enemy is outside, you can have any familiar, it doesn't need to be a bat, move out of the heavy obscurement, share sense with a bonus action, and then suddenly you can see the enemy, meaning that you have advantage to attack them and they have a disadvantage to attack you. Back to bats, they are also just really good as sensors. If your DM likes illusions, bat breaks all of them. Third in our trio of flyers, or at least the ones that I'm going to talk about, is the Raven. This one really only has one thing that's particularly special about it, its mimicry feature. This allows it to replicate a sound. Importantly, this is not speech. The Raven is not a parrot. It cannot pass verbal messages on. It just does sound effects. I know that it says whisper here, but this is in reference to the sound rather than the ability to talk in a hushed voice. This is as useful as you can make it. I can't really give advice here. I just think that it's worth being aware that if you have a need for a pet that makes bell sounds to trick a guard into thinking it's lunchtime, then the Raven has you covered. Okay, so all of those were beasts specified as options in the text of the spell. But our next one is a CR0 beast which is not specified. It's absolutely allowed by the spell, but it is probably worth double checking with your DM anyway, just so that they know what to expect. So here's the situation. You're a gnome or a halfling or some other small species, and you want a horse that will give you some mobility. Unfortunately, none of the horses are available options, but you don't need them, because there's something even better. Introducing one of the best mundane mounts in the entire game, the deer. This thing is absolutely cracked. It has the agile feature. That's the same as the owl's flyby, it's immune to opportunity attacks. Normally, controlled mounts need to use the disengage action to avoid opportunity attacks, but the deer can either dodge or use the dash action to run 100 feet in a single turn. This thing is Phantom Steed at level 1, but only for small characters. Genuinely, the deer is an absolutely massive reason to choose a small species at character creation. That 100 feet movement without opportunity attacks is really good. Right, short pause. Let's talk about Barding. So you may have noticed that the familiar options all have essentially no HP and god-awful AC. Is there anything that you can do about that? In 2014, the answer was Barding. Any armour could be customised for an animal at 4 times the basic cost. That meant that you could give your owl a breastplate to boost it up to 16 AC. In 2024, however, Barding specifies that it's for mounts. Unfortunately, no more armoured owls, but the deer is a mount, so you can give it Barding. That means that this thing can actually have some pretty decent AC. If If you're willing to drop it down to 40 foot walk speed, realistically 80 feet because you're always dashing, you can give your deer plate barding for 18 AC. Slap a saddle of the cavalier on it, giving all attacks disadvantage, and you actually have a pretty bulky pet. Except it falls over if it's subjected to a saving throw. You can't win at everything. Anyways, yes, deer is fantastic if you're playing a small character. Definitely give it some consideration. I think it's even better than the owl. Actually, even if you're not small, you can still give it to one of your allies to ride instead. Hi there, Editing Twig here. It's about 3 hours before the video is due to go live, so sorry about the lower quality of editing in this section. Yesterday I put out a post about this, and I got a few interesting responses for recommended forms that I decided were relevant enough to add in here. First up, there are a few suggestions for beasts from older books, like the flying monkey. I don't consider any pre-2024 content in any of my videos unless otherwise stated. It's just a personal choice, so flying monkey won't be here. Second, a couple of people picked out the vulture as a potential flying mount. They are right, this is a medium creature, so small characters could potentially ride it. However, there are actually 2 requirements for a mount. It must be a size larger than you, but it must also have appropriate anatomy. The second requirement, I think, disqualifies the vulture. There's not really anywhere for you to sit. Furthermore, it can't grapple and pick you up because grappling explicitly requires hands or a special ability. There is, however, one form that I will straight up admit that I missed because I didn't think to check the DMG for unique monsters. The giant fly is a large creature with 60 foot fly speed, and the description of the figure of wondrous power does specifically state that you can mount the fly it summons. As far as I'm aware though, this magic item is the only place that the giant fly appears, so I would definitely run it past your DM before using it. But it is technically a valid option for Find Familiar, and would probably be an even better mount than the deer in the majority of cases. Editing Twig, out. Going back to the list, we have a group which I'm going to call the Infiltration Specialists. These are things like the spider and the rat, which are relatively small and wouldn't look out of place like an owl would. If you ever need to do some important scouting, then these guys are your main options, since they are the best at going unnoticed. I'll also specifically bring up the badger, which is again a CR0 beast not specifically called out by the spell. This thing has a burrow speed of 5 feet. It probably won't come up much, but if you really need to infiltrate somewhere underground, badger can do it. Not much else to say here except for 3 more tactical options. Our first is the sneak buddy. Something like a spider realistically isn't very useful in combat, so if you're caught out before you've changed it back into an owl or a bat or a deer, there's not much that you can do with it, unless you have a rogue in the party. One of the conditions for sneak attack is to have one of your allies within 5 feet of the target. A spider sat on the rogue's shoulder fulfills that condition, allowing them to get a melee sneak attack off even if they normally couldn't. Pretty useful. As for the flavour of this, maybe the spider shoots silk in the target's eyes or something? Our second scouting tactic is the Sacrificial lamb. Let's say that there's a trap and you don't want to risk taking damage, or aren't 100% sure what the trigger is. Familiars are cheap, really cheap. Rather than putting yourself in danger, Tony the rat could set off the rockfall trap for you. Sure, Tony is now dead, but he can be resummoned. If there's ever a dangerous area, familiars are a really good way of testing out your route and making sure that it's safe. The third option is much more humane than sacrificing your rat though. I call it lockbreaking. There's a door that you can't get through. The rogue tried to pick it, but they rolled a 2, and the barbarian is too hungover to try and beat it down. Time for an Infiltration Specialist. Remember, when you cast Find Familiar whilst you already have your familiar active, you can just change what form it's in. So if you've currently got an owl, you can recast to turn it into a spider. So what you're going to do is you're going to have your spider crawl into the lock, or the gap under the door, or the crack in the wall, or whatever small space you're trying to get through. And then you're going to recast Find Familiar. Deer. Where the door once stood, there is now a gaping hole. A deer is inside. Simply pocket dimension your now stuck and possibly mashed deer and climb through. Okay, obviously this is incredibly DM dependent. There's absolutely nothing saying that you can do this. We're literally talking about the Ant-Man in Thanos' sphincter meme. But it's funny as all hell. You will get a laugh at the table, and that's what's really important here. Also, this takes a full hour to do unless you're either a druid or a chainlock, in which case, hey, what action baby, let's do some property damage. Right, moving on. The last mundane option that I want to talk about is the Baboon. Again, an unlisted CL0 beast. This is the only non-chain pact option which has hands, so maybe the only one that can hand out potions or pass out items, depending on how your DM rules it. It also has pact tactics, giving it advantage on all attacks if an ally is within 5 feet of the target. Normally that can't be used, familiars can't use the attack action, but because it has hands, the Baboon could be a special case on some tables. Let's talk more about magic items. Technically, your familiar also has 3 attunement slots. That means that technically you can offload the attunement to useful non-combat items, such as a weapon of warning, to your familiar. Or maybe even give them something like a ring of spell storing, so they can use the magic action to cast Hypnotic Pattern in combat. Since that's not the attack action, they can do it. And it also uses the familiar's concentration, not your own. Baboon lets you take it a step further though, thanks to its hands. Let's say that you have an Enspelled Staff containing Scorching Ray. Your Baboon can attune to it, hold it, and cast the spell. And because of Pact Tactics, it has advantage on each ray. That's a gigantic boost to the party's offenses. Obviously, massively DM dependent. Do not assume that you can do this. In fact, I'd probably assume that you can't. But as the acronym goes, Trudsik. The rules don't say I can't. Obviously other options do exist, but they are kinda niche. If you're underwater, sure, octopus or seahorse. If you really need extra perception, eagle. Rather than going over every single option though, let's move on to the warlock. I've mentioned it a few times already, but Warlock's Pact of the Chain allows you to cast Find Familiar using just one action, still without a spell slot. Furthermore, you get a bunch of stronger forms, and you can forego one attack with the attack action to instead have your familiar attack using its reaction. That is very important at low levels, because having an imp attack is actually more damage than Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast and Hex. Let's introduce the tactic of damage maxing. It is the most slotless damage a warlock can do on their turn before level 5, and even better, this does not use the imp's action, so they can then spend their action on each turn going invisible, meaning that the 3d6 plus 3 attack always has advantage, which is more damage than a goddamn barbarian. Slight warning that much like the touch spells, your familiar doesn't get to move in advance. It already needs to be in position, or you need to use the ready action, although this time it doesn't use concentration. But damage maxing with the Imp Familiar is one of the strongest low-level damage options in the entire game, and Imp has even more versatility. Much like the Baboon, this is a form with hands, so it can potentially use items, and its Dark Vision ignores the Darkness spell, so it can be used for sharing senses like the Bat. It can also stay invisible to help spam like the Owl, and unlike the Raven, it actually can speak, and it can shapeshift into that Raven to get 60-foot fly speed, which is weirdly faster than the Raven normally is. It's also the second bulkiest familiar, only behind the Quasit, with 21 HP and several resistances and immunities, as well as advantage on all saves against magic. The Imp is just absolutely stacked. Much like the Owl is the best generic form for the Wizard, the Imp is the best generic form for the Warlock. But there are some other options with their own benefits. For example, the Pseudodragon has a unique tactic, Sleeper Stinging. This thing is really interesting. Its sting feature is a con save to do a little bit of damage, poison the target, and most importantly, knock them unconscious. It can turn skip enemies, give an ally an automatic critical hit on their next attack, or potentially just remove a target from the fight. Even better, this does not use the attack action. It's a saving throw feature, which means that you don't need to spend your Warlock's own action to do it. Now, DC 12 isn't great, which is where Investment of the Chainmaster comes in. This is a 5th level invocation, which gives you a bunch of stuff, but the important point right now is your save DC. With Investment, that DC 12 boosts up to whatever your spell save DC is, probably 15. Pseudodragon with Investment represents a once per round sleep spell with no actions, spell slots, or any other resources required. Moving on from Sleeper Stinging though, Investment of the Chainmaster also has another significant sub-feature, Quick Attack. This lets you spend your Warlock's bonus action to allow your familiar to take the attack action. Obviously you don't want to be doing that with the Pseudodragon, it's using its action to sting, but what about the Imp? It's doing loads of damage. Well, it was already using its action each turn to go invisible and get advantage on attacks. Investment only represents plus 0.5 damage per round. Damage maxing obviously does use your Warlock's attack action though, so maybe you actually would rather keep your action and instead spend your bonus action to have the Imp attack without invisibility, in which case you can expect just over 7 average damage per round. Depending on your build though, you might already have another bonus action that does equivalent damage or has some other highly beneficial effect. I'm not saying that Investment of the Chainmaster is a bad invocation by any means, but unless you are using specifically the Pseudodragon for sleeper stinging, I think it's not a must pick. You should consider your other invocation options too. Investment has a few other points, but I think that they are minor at best given how disposable and replaceable a Chain Familiar is. Our next form is actually one of my favourites, the Sphinx of Wonder. This is reasonably comparable to the Imp, with very similar damage, HP, AC, and also resistances, although Radiant is a much better damage type than Poison. But instead of turning invisible like the Imp, the Sphinx gets to spend its reaction twice per day to give an ally +2 on any ability check or saving throw, and that can be big. If you roll a 15 and aren't sure whether that will pass or fail, you can probably lock in the pass by boosting up to 17. Now, twice per day is somewhat limiting. Luckily, there is a tactic here: daily cheating. After you've used both of your Sphinx's bursts of ingenuity, you can dismiss it, and then recast Find Familiar to get a new Sphinx with its 2 daily bursts refreshed. In essence, this Sphinx turns Pact of the Chain into 10 GP in an action for 2+2s accessible at any time. Sneaky past a guard, 10 GP for +2. Barbarian is trying to lift a big rock, 10 GP for +2. Searching for traps, 10 GP for +2. This is essentially just guidance, except it stacks with guidance. It comes up so incredibly often, and daily cheating means that it's always available. Now, because the Sphinx wants its reaction free for burst and doesn't have an especially good combat action, I do think that Investment of the Chainmaster is more worth it here than it is on the Imp, but it's still worth looking at other options first before you lock it in. Sphinx can't make use of that DC boost. The other chain options are probably less powerful. Quasi acts as a sort of hybrid between the Imp and the Pseudodragon, with invisibility, hands, and a non-attack status condition. Although I think it is worse than its peers at each of those roles due to lower speed, damage, and control. It's the only option with everything though. Sprite has some niche use with allowing you to sense emotions and alignment, so it works as a cheap but low quality detect thoughts. And Skeleton has a low damage range attack with its short bow. Oh, and according to Lord Jeremy Crawford, the Venomous Snake is mechanically best. For the most part though, I think that Warlocks probably want to mainly stick with the Imp, Pseudodragon, or Sphinx. Although something that you may have noticed is that none of those have a 50-foot walk speed, is immune to opportunity attacks, can dash every single turn, and can be mounted. That's right, despite all of these amazing things that Chain Familiars can do, none of them can replicate the Deer. It is that strong and that unique that even Chainlocks should still be considering giving the party gnome a mount. I'm really serious about this. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video, it's to try out the Deer. It absolutely transforms low and mid-level combat. Right, let's finish off with a few tactics that I couldn't really fit in anywhere else. Gaze of Two Minds is a 5th level Warlock invocation, which kind of acts as an upgrade to the sense sharing ability, because it also lets you cast non-touch spells from your familiar space. Infiltrate with an invisible Imp, drop a fear spell on them from 3 rooms over, and then waltz in and clean up the helpless enemies. Next up we have the Bag Defense. If you need to protect your familiar but don't have a bonus action free to put it in its pocket dimension, it can simply jump in someone's bag or pocket, which technically gives it full cover, so it's immune from basically everything. I would check that one with your DM first though, because I do think that it's perfectly reasonable to argue that a fireball would scorch the inside of a backpack as well. And our final, quote, tactic for the video is reskinning. I know it says owl or bat or deer or imp, but do not let that restrain you. If you want a pet ferret or a teddy bear filled with rocks and soil because your character is a self-proclaimed mad mud mage, do it. What your familiar looks like is ultimately not important, so just have fun. One of my favourite characters actually has a mouse, which they can use to click the subscribe button. Ha! Engagement! Bet you didn't see that coming. If you enjoyed this video and want another one like it, here's one about all of the best wild shape forms for Moon Druid, and a variety of different tactics and combos that you can use with them. Bye!